Friends, chess players, welcome back. Today we're working on calculation. I've already made a video where I showed you the chess calculation algorithm. I suggested this algorithm to you. Today, we're going to put it into practice a bit. That is, we're going to do a couple of exercises together on chess tempo. I've often recommended this platform to you because compared to other platforms like chess.com or Lichess, where we can do tactics, the ones on C's tempo are slightly more complicated. From this point of view, then, in addition to doing calculation, in addition to doing tactics, a little bit. So we are going to do this calculation, and today we'll try to do it together, applying the algorithm I explained to you. Last time, the SCAC algorithm. So we need to look for checks, captures, direct attacks, and pawn contacts. Before we start, I want to debunk a myth, because I've often seen this algorithm presented in some texts as SCAP with a final P, where the final P stands for game plan. Well, I don't agree with this other terminology, so I stick to the nomenclature suggested by my teacher Vacaturo, which is SCAC, because in my opinion, the game plan. It's extremely important to look for it in a position, but this is an algorithm for finding the candidate move. So the game plan is something else entirely. It's not about the single move. And besides, I wouldn't rule out the final C, meaning pawn contacts, and therefore also breakthrough pushes, because these are very important in the position. So let's stick with the SCAC algorithm and do some exercises together to apply this algorithm. So what does this method consist of? SCAC? We need to look at all the candidate moves that lead to checks, captures, direct attacks, and pawn contacts. Even the completely useless candidate moves. At first, we visualize them, and then if they're useless, we discard them. So let's do these exercises together on chess tempo. The first thing to do in these exercises, though, just to get into the position and look at the material, especially on chess tempo. Because sometimes there are exercises where you simply need to defend yourself, and others where you have to find the tactic. So generally, if you have an extra rook, that exercise will be a defensive one. So let's count the main pieces first. Alright, let's look at this position. The knights are equal, 2 rooks each, the queen, pawns. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We are down a pawn. We have 1 less pawn with black, so we need to find something here. So, let's start with checks. Let's look at the candidate moves that give check. Unfortunately, on C stamp there are no arrows, so I'll try to guide you a bit with the mouse. So, the 2 checks we have available are rook to C1 check and queen to C1 check. Queen to C1 check. We'll probably rule that one out, definitely. Rook to C1 check is a move we need to look at. Let's analyze the captures. So, as for captures, we have rook takes G3, then we have knight takes G2. And captures, captures, captures. Of course, we also have queen takes A2, and that should be all of them. I think that's it. Let's move on to direct attacks. For direct attacks, we have rook to C2, which directly attacks the G2 square anyway. You see, guys, we need to analyze all the direct attacks. Then, obviously, rook to C2 is clearly not going to work, right? Because there's queen to F7 check and queen to D7 mate, so Anyway, we also need to look at those moves that are completely unreasonable candidates. Then we discard them right away, so the fact that rook to C2 should be discarded, we've discarded it in an instant in the various captures, like knight takes G2, queen takes A2, those should be discarded immediately. We can see that, right? Queen to F7 check, queen to D7, mate. But, in any case, the important thing is that we're considering them as candidates, okay? So let's keep going. More direct attacks. We have rook to F8. Another direct attack that targets the queen. We have rook to G4 attacking the queen. This too will probably lead to mate, so we can discard it. Pawn contacts. We don't have any, and as for other direct attacks, we have the queen. V3, a direct attack. Let's say that in general, in this position, many moves are quickly discarded. Because obviously there's the threat of the queen. F7 check and queen to D7 mate. So at this point, definitely a little mental help. we need to look at the direct moves, so potentially it will be a check in this position, because otherwise, let's say, we get checkmated. At most, maybe a move like rook to f8, which attacks the queen and defends against mate, so that's what we need to watch out for. So then, what useful candidate moves do we have left? Definitely rook to c1 is a useful candidate we have left, and then rook to f8 is another definitely useful candidate that's still available. Queen to c1, we had already ruled that out before. It doesn't really seem like much. So, at this point, let's go a bit further with the analysis, right? Rook to c1 check and rook to f8 are the two moves we have left, right? Let's always start by analyzing the forcing moves. So the forcing move is rook to c1 check. At this point, let's say, we can see the two moves white generally has. The first is rook takes c1, and the second, let's say, is king to f2. There could also be knight to f1, blocking the check with knight to f1. But let's say, you can see, right? That rook takes on g2, so knight to f1 looks very, very suspicious. Let's start right away with rook takes, so at this point we recapture with queen takes. And then if the king goes back to f2, it's the same problem as before. We could play rook to f8. And obviously, let's say, the queen is pinned to the king, and so we capture the queen. So already this line seems interesting, definitely more interesting. Of rook to f8. But let's look at the other possibility. So rook to c1, at this point rook takes c1, queen takes c1, and knight to f1. So the defense is with the knight. At this point, the interesting move was take here, the king moves to h1 and now the knight is undefended, but it's not so clear. These are already slightly more complicated exercises on this account. I already have a rating of 2000 because I wanted to show you. Let's say because the simpler ones, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do them. What a calculation, huh? And in fact, we've kind of reached a dead end, because actually, when do I? Rook to c1, rook takes c1, queen takes c1, knight to f1, rook takes g2, king to h1. At this point, the king is safe. The king is safe if I were to take on f1. And unfortunately here, the same thing always happens. You can't draw arrows for teaching purposes. Guys, I'll try to slow down, maybe try setting it up on a chessboard and making the moves yourselves. So when he plays knight to f1, if I were to capture the knight with check, he can recapture with the queen. Then I take with the knight, but the rook on g2 is left hanging. And so at the end of the variation, I lose the rook. See how complicated it is? Don't worry, this is already an exercise. In my opinion, from first national level and up though, what matters is reasoning and seeing how to apply the method. So after I analyzed this variation, I realized there's a little hitch that actually rook to c1 isn't so... it seemed really strong, right? Rook to c1, I go there, the king moves, and he loses the queen to the rook. Fate, and yet... Actually, afterwards we realized that this defense with knight to f1, at a certain point it works. And that's why it's important to have looked at all the candidate moves. So we had also analyzed it. Rook to f8. So at this point, let's look again at rook to f8, because rook to f8 is attacking the queen. And what if the queen actually moves? At that point, rook to c1 becomes decisive, because the rook on f8 is attacking the f1 square. And so, let's say the knight can no longer go back to defend. So actually, after rook to f8, how does white defend? Let's always look for checks for white as well. So I play rook to f8. If he were to capture, that's fine. I can recapture with anything, even with the queen, and I've taken the queen. If he captures, what other captures can he make? Okay, if he captures the pawn or captures the knight. If he captures the knight, obviously I have the queen defending, so he can't do that. If he captures the pawn, there's the same problem as before, rook to c1. And this time it's checkmate, because then he can't defend on f1. If he tries to attack the queen, for example with rook to b3, either one, I have intermediate checks with rook to c1. So then the queen from a3 moves, and his queen is still under threat. So you see, with this analysis, I really like the position that has arisen because it really helps us understand this method well. In the meantime, I found the two candidate moves. Rook to c1 seemed hot. I analyzed it, but it's important. Guys, when you do exercises, you always have to look at the defense. So rook to c1 seems hot, but it doesn't work because there's a defense afterwards, and so having found it, the candidate moves make us say, so let's also look at the other one. Let's analyze the other one, and indeed the other move. Rook to f8. Let's say it combines all the positive aspects of rook to c1, of that idea, but avoids that defense with knight to f1. So now I'm going to play rook to f8. If it's wrong, I'll feel bad. No, the move is correct. The move is correct. Careful for a moment, because these are the famous trick exercises. So, theoretically he just captured, so it's clear he's about to lose the queen. But I could capture with the king, and I could also capture with the queen. And one of the two is wrong. So be careful, the exercise isn't over yet. I thought it was even simpler. Let's see why one of the two is wrong. This is really curious. So then, because actually, in both cases I take material, so why should one be wrong? Alright, let's see. If I capture with the king, what happens if I capture with the king? But the queen can't be trapped. Rook to f1, check. No, because the knight is defending. Okay, I captured with the king. For example, right now it doesn't seem too bad to me. Too bad. Also, one thing I obviously need to watch out for is the move. Knight to h5. Because knight to h5, then he wants to come in with knight to f6 and bother me. If I keep the queen on a3, capturing with the king, of course, then I always have the chance to play. Rook to c1, check. An important move that, let's say, solves a couple of problems. Maybe by trading a rook, and that way my king isn't so weak, because with two rooks it's dangerous. But if I were to capture with the queen, actually, queen takes knight on h5 seems dangerous because then my king doesn't have many squares. The threat is knight to f6. And so, for this reason, actually the exercise wasn't over. You see, you still need to make the correct move, which in my opinion is king takes on f8, exactly, the highest tactics score of all time. Yes, because this is the account I use, in fact, to do some tests. Did you see? Let's see if we can go back. Let's say, okay, let's return to the position. You see how this method, in my opinion, has really proven itself with this position here. That is, first of all, using the SCAC method, I go and select the candidate moves. And I'm not done yet. I start from that selection of candidate moves and begin to evaluate. I start by evaluating the most forcing one, so the most forcing move. Here it was rook to c1, check. I evaluate the complications, and at a certain point I have to consider my opponent's defenses. When I see the defenses, I say okay, I also have the other candidate move, so I go back to rook to f8, and as you can see, let's say, the problem was the right one, me, rook to f8. I didn't see it right away either. The first thing I saw in this position, and I also thought it was the right move, was rook to c1, check, because it was very immediate. If the king moves away, rook to f8 comes. And so it really caught my attention, but with proper analysis, it's clear. At a certain point, I managed to roll out rook to c1 and say okay. The correct move is rook to f8, which combines, let's say, the positive aspects of rook to c1, while avoiding possible defenses from my opponent. So I hope that this example has, let's say, rounded out the discussion we had last time about the move search algorithm. If you missed the video, go check it out. I'll put it here, and of course in the description, but you can also find it on the channel. As always, if you want to support this channel, if you like this format, if you want to see more training sessions, of course let me know in the comments, and that's it. I'll see you in the next videos.